Now, last Friday, the government announced that it will purchase surplus pork for the country's food banks, which will go a long way to easing the looming animal welfare crisis in the New Zealand pork sector, while providing food for communities here in need. Independent butchers were not allowed to open fully for retail customers under the COVID-19 Alert Level 4 and 3 restrictions. And this resulted in a surplus of up to 5,000 pigs on New Zealand farms every week. Of course, becoming quite the animal welfare issue. Now, under this initiative announced today, the government's going to purchase at cost up to a maximum of 2,000 pigs or 112,000 kilograms per week, which will then be delivered to food banks via a national food rescue network known as Kiwi Harvest. We're joined now by CEO for New Zealand Pork, David Baines. David, I firstly wanted to just check in actually on the welfare of your pig farmers over what has been a very stressful time.
Yeah, good evening, Sarah. Thanks for that. The welfare of the farmers has been one of our primary concerns. Whilst we've been going through these challenges of COVID, we've been well aware that it does have a human effect. So we employed an independent person to ring all of our farmers just to check up with them on a confidential basis, to give them a bit of moral support, and if they did perceive that there were any issues, to be able to refer them on to some other help. We're very conscious that the challenges that the whole industry faces does prevent some very personal challenges as well.
Sorry, I just wanted to go straight into that because we have to appreciate the fact that there's sort of different playing fields here for the different parts of the red meat sector over that time. And of course, the news today will be great, but is it enough?
We hope that it will be. Obviously, we're 7.5 weeks through this crisis, so we've been managing to avoid an on-farm welfare issue. But that's come at considerable cost, mainly to wholesalers at this point, because what they have done up until this point is place a lot of this surplus product to manufacturers who pre-COVID would purchase most of their raw materials through frozen imported pork. So very early on, with MPI's assistance, we had a coordinated approach to replace some of that imported product with New Zealand produced product. So that actually helped move the surplus product through the supply chain. But because we had to match the imported price, that was coming at between $1.50 and $2 a kilo below cost price punishment, really, to the wholesalers. So that wasn't sustainable. So the food bank option is one which we think is fantastic. It's a win-win because it's giving good quality, nutritious pork to hungry people, and it's helping to move the product through our supply chain at cost, which is far more attractive than that $1.50 below cost option.
Okay, so at cost is New Zealand's break-even point. It's not based on the matching imported pork. So that's a good relief. And just wanting to turn attention to, we are not known as a pork exporter here in New Zealand. It's been quite sporadic over the years, but great to see our trading partners, Singapore, really starting to ramp up their food supply security in New Zealand, benefiting from that.
Yeah, we were very keen to see that happen. Singapore has been a possible export market for us for a number of years, but often we have struggled to compete with the international price. So what the COVID environment has done is it's, changed the perspective for the Singapore government that they want to secure a wider range of supply channels for their population, and they're looking at their Southeast Asian neighbours to help supply that. So, yeah, we're pretty keen that they've helped remove some of the regulatory obstacles, which prior to now had been a bit of an impediment for us.
I was just seeing the certification of New Zealand pork into Australia's not that old. What are some of those hurdles that you need to get through from a food safety perspective into other markets compared to, say, red meat?
Well, I guess because most of our pork production has been placed in the domestic market, there hasn't been a need for the abattoirs that process that pork to be licensed for export. So 5 out of our 6 main abattoirs operate under an abattoir licence. The sixth one is based on a multi-species plant run by an exporter, so they have an export licence. So a lot of the market requirements for exports requires export certification, but that final hurdle to go from a abattoir licence to a meat export licence often requires a vet to be present on site, and that's quite a significant cost for the processor. So where there's only a small proportion of the production destined for export markets, it actually makes it difficult from a financial point of view to cover that cost to jump up to that export vet inspection side. So, what's happened now is that the Singapore government has accepted the equivalence of the domestic supply regulations in New Zealand. So abattoir licences who have RMPs in place, risk management programs, are able to obtain listing for Singapore.
That's fantastic news. Now, as I was just saying, whilst you were just reconnecting there, David, I've obviously been following closely the country of origin labelling bill, which I think is a pet of Gareth Hughes. Am I correct?
Yes, which is doubly good given that Gareth has disclosed himself to be a vegetarian. So the fact that he was passionate about making sure that bacon was included in the bill, I think he acknowledged was a significant step for him as well.
Now, a lot of things have sort of gone very quiet because the excuse of COVID, but there is also a pending election. International trade negotiations have been able to sort of continue over lockdown. David, are you sort of thinking there's another reason why the progress of this country of origin labelling bill has been sort of parked?
We can't understand why it's been parked. We think that the bill is necessary to bring clarity for the consumers. So we're pretty bemused and surprised that it has in fact been parked. Not sure if there's any other motive other than just trying to put off things which government perhaps perceives might be non-essential. But we would argue that this is an essential piece of legislation. From our market research with consumers, they told us that they're surprised that a lot of the product that they're buying appears to be sourced from New Zealand, when in fact it's been sourced from an overseas market and manufactured in New Zealand, but because it can carry that statement on the back of the pack, made in New Zealand from local and imported products, it gives the appearance that it's from New Zealand when in fact it's not.
Oh, this is an absolute pet of mine, David. I used to run a hotel, and the imported Finnish pork belly coming into the restaurant, I couldn't get my head around how I could actually access, and the clear lines there to support New Zealand made, especially with a lot of buy local going on at the moment. It's not very easy to be able to determine the truth behind it. Have you made any progress over the last couple of years, though, around some of those terminologies within that bill?
We've spent a lot of time working with MPI and MBIE in terms of what the regulation should include. We've made some recent submissions to MBIE and to Minister Farfoy that there should be clarity so that imported pork, whether it's marinated or flavoured or rejected, should also be clearly labelled with the country of origin. The first draft of the regulation excluded that product, which we found to be really disappointing because when we look at supermarket chillers, we can see some fresh New Zealand product, maybe some loins, sitting alongside some flavoured or injected product, which typically is from imported pork. And the way the regulations were drafted prior to the final version of it was that imported product didn't have to carry any country of origin labelling. So we thought, well, that doesn't actually provide any sort of clarity for the consumer. Whilst our product would proudly show made in New Zealand, the imported product could sit alongside it and just appear to be from New Zealand. So we're lobbying very strongly that product does carry the country of origin label on it as well.
David, I wanted to say thank you so much for your lobbying on this, because in a lot of our other sectors of our industry, food security over supply is not so much a pressing issue as we can feed 5 million plus more. And it's going to be people like yourselves that can highlight what can happen when an imbalance happens between imports and exports. So good on you, and let's keep following this one right through. And fantastic news around being able to alleviate this animal welfare crisis, which in my mind, and I'm sure yours, shouldn't probably have happened in the first place. It's David Baines, the CEO for New Zealand Pork. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
You're welcome, Sarah.
This is Sarah's Country.